Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Harry Lauseniziris, and this is the YouTube channel grecochess. We continue covering the grecochess online tournament that takes place at the platform of chess.com. 16 players compete for the championship, divided into 4 groups of 4. Winner from every group advances to the final round. Two more games have been completed, both of them from Group 1, and both of them involving the same players, Butterfly and Maxim Govorukha. In each game, one player has the white and the other the black, and they alternate. And we're going to see these two games, but not first the one game and then the other, but 5 moves from each of them to see how the two games will evolve until the end. But before we discuss these games, one more announcement. One of our subscribers, Zanilor, is organizing the tournament Underwater Moonlight, the Nine Moons tournament. I have registered and I would like to invite all of the viewers to register and participate. We are waiting for 243 players to register. Until now, we have 52. And once we have 243 players, the tournament will start. But enough of that, then let's continue with the Greco chess. And let's go now to the two boards of the two games. And here we are. Both games, the same players. In this game that you see on your screen, Maxim Govorukha has the white pieces and Butterfly has the black. You see there is a significant rating difference. Maxim Govorukha has 1741 versus 1370 of Butterfly. So clearly Maxim Govorukha is a favorite, but let's see what will happen on the board. And the game starts. Pawn to e4, Maxim Govorukha, standard opening, the most popular first move. D4 is the other one. The Sicilian defense for Butterfly, pawn to c5. Knight to f3 for Maxim Govorukha. And knight to c6 for Butterfly. Pawn to d4 for white. Knight, pawn takes at d4. Knight takes at d4. And the black knight is going to go to e6. In case you wonder, sometimes the black knight may take the white, but then the queen goes to d4, and white has quite an advantage with queen at the middle of the board, and no knight to challenge it and make it go back. The fifth move of white is also a book move. Bishop goes to e3, gives extra protection to the knight at d4. And you see the little book, meaning until now all these moves have been extensively analyzed in theory. Black will deviate from the book. Pawn goes to a6. This is an inaccuracy, as you see here, with the question mark and exclamation point. The computer would prefer for black to send the knight to f6. You see the green arrow. And after the first 5 moves, white has an advantage of 0.5. But we are switching now to the other game. In the other game, where Butterfly has a white and Maxim Govorukha has a black. Let's see here the first 5 moves. Pawn to c4 for white. This is called the English opening. It is the third most popular opening after pawns go to e4 and d4. Pawn to e6 for black. Pawn to g3 for white, and Butterfly with white prepares the fianchetto. Fianchetto is when white puts the bishops on b2 g7 or black to b7 g7, and by doing so they control the long diagonals, and the bishops have the longest, I wouldn't say the longest, but quite a long influence. Of course, the longest ones would be in the center where they control 13 squares. Pawn to d5 for black. Bishop to g2, white completes the fianchetto. Black sends knight to f6. White sends knight to f3, fourth move, black bishop to e7. Short castling for white, then short castling for black. And we complete the first 5 moves, both two sides. Both of them are book moves. You see, both of them, both players, meaning all 10 moves until now are book moves. You see the book here. We're continuing now. We're switching to the previous game, where white had a 0.5 advantage after the first 5 moves. Move number 6, bishop to d3. A computer would prefer pawn to c4, but even that is excellent move. You see the thumbs up. Pawn to e6 for black. Sim to d6. Short castling for white. The computer would prefer white is more aggressive and play and sets a pawn to f4. Same like before, pawn to c4 and get more space. Queen to c7 for black. Pawn to f4. Now that white actually places the pawn on f4, the computer would prefer the pawn to go to c4, but at least it's a good move. Let's see back. We see the check mark. And black will send the pawn to f6. Excellent move, but the computer would prefer knight exchange. Pawn to c3 for white. Pawn to e7 for black. And white completes the 10 moves with knight to d2. And black has short castling. We completed the first 10 games in this game with a 0.4 advantage for white. That is a small advantage, doesn't mean anything too much. Just because white started first, they start with a small advantage. Let's go to the other game. We finished the first 5 moves with white having a small advantage of 0.2. Move number 6 for white, butterfly, pawn goes to b3, and white is ready to fianchetto the other bishop as well. This is also a book move. And now black will deviate, sending the knight to e4. Deviate meaning from book, from theory. Knight to e4, of course, you want your knight to be in the center and ideally in the opponent's half of the board. Computer has it as a kind of inaccuracy with the question mark and the exclamation point. Bishop to b2, white completes the fianchetto. White has fianchetto both bishops. You see there's a star, the best move according to the computer. Bishop to f6 for black. Challenges the dark long diagonal. Queen to c2 for white. So if the black bishop takes at b2, the white bishop, then the queen will take back and the queen will control the long diagonal. Knight to c6 for black. And now white exchanges the bishops. Inaccuracy, one can see clearly why it's in inaccuracy. The two bishops are fighting for the long dark diagonal, meaning the one from a1 to h8, and by the exchange, black surrenders. Now the long diagonal is controlled by the black queen and also attacks the white knight on the white rook on a1. So white has to think what to do with to save the rook. The rook cannot move, by the way. Not too many things to do. The only safe way is to put the knight at is to put the knight at a3, so the one knight protects the other. Let's see how the game will continue. White sends a pawn to d5. It's a good move for the computer, not the best. The best was exactly what I had suggested. Knight goes to a3. Now let's see what would happen. Can the black queen take the white knight? Yes and no. If they do so, the white is going to take the knight on c6 and will be up an exchange. But the black queen is, not that safe square. But still, I think that black could take the white rook and be at least an exchange up. But let's see how game continues. Knight goes to, pawn goes to d5. Computer thinks that this is the best. Would rather not have the black queen take the white rook on a1. At least for me as a human, I would see that black would be up immaterial if they took the rook. Of course, there's a problem that if the diagonal is blocked, then the black queen could be in danger. But here we complete the first 10 moves from each side. And how is the game going? The game is even. You see 0.00. If I try to get a second decimal point, white is ahead by 0.02. So after the first 10 moves, the game with butterfly having the white is actually even. Let's go now to the other game and continue. After the first 5 moves, white, meaning Maxim Govorucha, had an advantage of 0.4. And move number 11 for white. Rook goes to c1. Good move to the computer. You see the check mark, not the best, but white loses the advantage is 0.0 now. Black sends a pawn to b5, trying to start an attack. The computer doesn't like it, inaccuracy. It gives again 0.5 white advantage for white. Why? Maybe because the knight on c6 is not so well protected, and if knight goes away, then the queen is facing the rook on c1. Another inaccuracy, knight goes to b3 for white from d2 to b3. Bishop to b7 for black to control the long diagonal. Pawn to h3 for white to avoid having the knight going to g4. A good move, but not the best. Black sends the knight to a5, hoping to exchange the knights with white, and then set the queen on a5. White will send the queen on c2, mistakes the computer, and now black is ahead by 0.9. Knight to c4 for black. Computer thinks it's a great move. Attacks the knight on e3, which is unprotected for now. Of course, the white knight can take, the white bishop can take the black knight. White will surrender bishop for a knight. But white prefers to send the bishop back to f2 instead of taking the knight. And black will send the rook to c8, a good move, not the best. The best would be to start attacking the knight going to h5. You see the green arrow. We completed the first 15 moves for Maxim Govorucha having white versus butterfly the black, and the black butterfly is ahead by 0.8. I will continue to the other game to see what happens after the first 10 moves, where butterfly has a white. It was even after the first 10 moves. Move 11, knight goes to a3. Computer would rather have the knight go to c3 because the knight is near the center and controls two central squares if it goes to c3. At least now the two rooks protect each other. So black queen cannot take the white rook. Pawn to a6 for white. Pawn to to a6 for black. Pawn to d3 for white. Inaccuracy, says the computer. Attacks the knight, but this is a one move threat, as I say. The knight goes to d6. The computer would rather have black sacrifice the knight and attack the white queen, you see. Rook to c1 for white. And aligns the rook and the queen. That's what's called the battery in the chess terminology. Rook to e8 for black to occupy the semi-open e file. It's called semi-open because there is a white pawn on e2 but no black pawn. Knight goes back to b1 for white. Inaccuracy, you don't like it when your pieces go back. But the white knight on a3 had not too many options. The other c2 was a queen cannot go. b5 and c4 would be taken by pawns. And that is why you saw before it was better if the knight had gone to c3 instead of a3. Knight to b5 for black. And soon we'll have moves number 15. Pawn to a4 for white, and computer thinks this is a blunder. You see the two question marks, meaning very serious mistake. And black is ahead by 4.0. Of course, if they continue correctly. But will they? What would be a correct move? It is not easy to see, and one has to think very carefully. If the knight goes to d4, and believe me, I didn't find it myself, I only saw it in the analysis, then they attack both knight on f3, queen c2, and if knight on f3 takes d4, then knight from c6 takes d4, and if white saves their queen on c2, they lose pawn on e2 with a check. This will give an advantage for black, at least by a pawn. The computer thinks it's way more than that. That's why it gives black a 4.0 advantage, a very important one, but only if black plays correctly. But will they? Nope. That's why you see it's a miss. The white X in a red circle means it's not exactly a mistake, but they missed a chance for a great move. So knight goes back to d6. You see the computer would rather have the knight go to d4. And thus we complete the first 15 moves in this game, with white being ahead by 0.3. And let's continue now with the other game. The game after the first 15 moves, black has advantage of 0.8. 0.8 is, well, better to have it than the opponent have it, but it's not yet that crucial. We'll continue move number 16. Rook goes to e1. The computer would rather have the rook go to a1 for white. Queen to b8 for black, inaccuracy. Knight to d2 for white, inaccuracy. And pawn to d5 for black. Computer thinks it's a blunder, very serious mistake. White is ahead by 0.9. Well, let's see why it's a blunder. Yes, it blocks the diagonal of the bishop at b7, but is it enough to be considered a blunder? And the white has the chance to move the pawn to e5, block queen's diagonal, and attack the knight on f6. Let's see why the computer thinks a blunder. Yes, pawn to e5, the great move for white, gives more space to the white. It does the following: blocks the queen at b8. Queen can only go to c7. Attacks the knight on f6, so white has to think what to do with his knight. And also opens the diagonal of the bishop at d3. You see what's going to happen once the knight moves anywhere. White is going to take the pawn on h7. That is why black's move was a blunder. And this move for white is a great move. Knight goes to d7. Well, it had to go somewhere. If it went to e4, by the way, at least it would save the pawn, to block the diagonal. And even if white takes the knights, the pawn takes back, yes, white could eventually gain the extra pawn because they control the e4 square quite well. But computer would prefer it to losing the h7 pawn. White will take the h7 pawn with a check. You see the star, the best move. Black plays the king on h8, basically telling white, if you don't move your bishop now, I'll put my pawn to g6 and you lose the bishop. And white puts the bishop back to d3. Not the best move for the computer, but computer would rather have knight go to b3. This would give white more space and continue even stronger attack. But white got the extra pawn that he wanted. They are ahead by 2.1. And let's see move number 20 for black. Knight takes knight on d2. And at this point, white is ahead by 4.0. That is an important advance for white after the first 20 moves. But we're going to switch now to the other game to see what happens after the first 15 moves going to the 20th. Until now, you see that white was ahead by 0.3. You see it here. Move 16, knight goes to c3 for white. Bishop to e6 for black. Pawn to e3 for whites. Inaccuracy says the computer, and bishop to g4. Computer says blunder. So white is ahead by 2.6. Why is a blunder? The pawn on d5 is unprotected. Knight can take it, attack the queen on f6, and also pawn on c7. But will they see it? And this really the best move. They save the knight. Yes, you see, computer would rather have the knight from c3 go to d5. So the result is that white, instead of being up by 2.6, they are up by only 0.1. Black will send the knight on b4. They attack the white queen, and also they protect the pawn on d5. Computer thinks a blunder gives white advantage of 1.9. Let's see how is this a case. The computer would want white to take the pawn on d5 and attack the queen on f6, but then knight on b4 could take it back. And computer thinks the white's move was a miss. So now black has advantage of 0.3. See, the green arrow shows what the computer thinks would be the best move. Pawn to c6 for black, the best move. And soon we reached move 20. Pawn to h3 for white to threaten the bishop on g4, but there's no reason to threaten it. The bishop on g4 was not attacking any. Perhaps later could go to e2 to attack the rook, but the rook could easily move. There is no pin, and also the king's protection is weakened because there's only one pawn on the second rank, the f2. And black hopefully will send the bishop. Yes, goes to f5, the best move. Threatens the pawn on e3. It is attacked twice by knight on b4 and bishop on f7. Protected, excuse me, only once by the queen on b1. And we completed 20 moves with black having advantage of 1.6. Let's switch to the other game now to see what happened. After the first 20 moves, white has advantage of 4.0. And of course, white better take back the knight, and they have only one way to do so, otherwise they'll lose the rook on f1. Of course, queen will take the knight. Pawn to g6, pawn to f5 for white. They are trying to open the space in front of the black king. And even that might cost him a pawn. Yes, it will cost him a pawn because there are two pawns attacking f5. And black has a choice which of the two to take it. But white sacrifices a pawn to weaken the space in front of the black king. They take it with the e pawn. Computer would rather have with the g pawn. Usually you like attacking toward, excuse me, taking towards the center. But maybe they didn't like the G file to be open, but they could always put the rook on G8. Move 23, queen goes to H6 for white, king goes to G8. You don't like it when the queen is next to your king, but of course white with only one queen cannot force a checkmate. They need at least a second piece to come and help. There are 3-4 pieces not yet ready to help, but not far away. Knight goes to f5. A computer thinks it's a brilliant move, and I'll explain it. It's a brilliant because white will sacrifice the knight for a pawn, but will open lines against the black king. Once the knight is taken, and of course black cannot afford not to take it, otherwise it's checkmate on g7, you'll see the open lines. Pawn takes to f5, what else can black do? And bishop takes to f5. And here you see the white flag in a red circle, which means that black resigned. You see that white has the m4 mate in 4 moves. You see if white could play a second move in a row, queen goes to h7. Black cannot easily defend. They can move the rook, but then queen will go to h7 and then to h8 mate. Not too many. What else can black do to save themselves? If knight goes to f6, well, pawn will take knight, and this will only postpone everything by one move. And at this point, black butterfly resigned, and Maxim Govorukha won the game that they had with white. But let's switch now to the other game after the 20 moves to see what's happening. Here you see Maxim Govorukha leading with 1.4 after the first 20 moves. Let's see how will white try to defend their pawn on d3. Pawn to e4, the best possible move, the only move that for the time being keeps the position. Still black has advantage of 1.6. Pawn takes pawn. Computer thinks a miss, would rather have the queen go to h6 and attack the white knight on d2. Pawn takes back. Black's advantage was minimized to 0.4. Pawn bishop to g6 for black. Saves the bishop. Pawn to f4 for white. White tries to get more space. Queen to d4 check for black. After 23 moves, the game is more or less even. Black has an advantage of just 0.3. And here everything changes. White defends the position with rook to f2y because their knight on d2 was under threat. Computer would rather have the king go to h2 and sacrifice the knight. But let's see what's going to follow this move. Black will put their knight on d3, and computer thinks a great move. It attacks the rook on f2. That cannot move because it's pinned. So white is going to lose at least an exchange, but can they minimize damage? Rook goes to f1. You see how desperate is the case that computer would rather have white lose the queen. Take the knight on d3 and lose the queen. But white did what most of us would do, put the rook on f1, hopefully trying to minimize the damage with just an exchange. Black will take the rook. White will take the rook. And after 25 moves, black's advantage is enormous, 5.2. And after move 26, black will take the white knight on c3. Black has an advantage of 5.2 and white resigns. You see the white flag in the red circle. And we completed the first two games. And Maxim Kovorokha, being the favorite, won both games. And let's see now what is the situation in the entire tournament after the two moves by Maxim Kovorokha. One moment to go to the appropriate page. Here we are. Group 1 that we just saw. Maxim Kovorukha has 4 points, 4 wins in 4 games versus 1 for Butterfly and U8630302. What's happening is that Hunting Achievements has not started yet, the games. In theory, Hunting Achievements, if hunting achievements, I'm sorry, if they can take at least 5 out of 6 games, they have a chance to advance. The rating is the lowest of all, 546. Let's see what this hunting achievement is going to do. But for the time being, Maxim Govorukha, 4 wins in 4 games, is a favorite. Group 2. Barak 7 and MGC 89 are the two favorite ones. They still have to complete the games between the two of them, and these are going to decide who is going to advance. Group 3, where I participate, UV1415 has timed out all of the games, and everything will be decided between the three of us, Abu Taleb, the Harry, myself that is, and Elaine, who will get the most points out of the three of us competing with each other. In Group 4, my skin from Italy has already advanced. But now let's go to the game review, and see how chess.com believes that the two players did. We're going first to the game that Maxim Govorukha had the white pieces and had an accuracy of 89.6 versus 66.5 for Butterfly. Maxim Govorukha played as if their rating was 2000 versus 900 for Butterfly. Quite an important difference. You can see Maxim Govorukha had a brilliant move, one great move each of them. Maxim Govorukha had another 5 best games, while the negatives, Butterfly had a blunder and 3 versus 1 mistakes for Butterfly. Into the game that they played, 16.6 percentage for Butterfly versus 75.2 for Maxim Kovorukha. Here, Butterfly played for as if their rating was 850 versus the 300 for Maxim Kovarucha. In the various categories, no brilliant moves. Maxim Kovarucha had the one great one, 7 versus 4 for the best. While in the negatives, Butterfly had 4 inaccuracies versus 1 mistake each of them, 2 misses and 2 blunders. This concludes the coverage of the last 2 games from the grecochess tournament. We'll continue with more games as they finish. And let's see which will be the 4 players that are going to advance. Until now, we already have 1 of them. I'm Harry Lasaniziris. Thank you, viewers, for watching the games. Thanks to the subscribers, to the likes, and to the encouraging comments. We'll be later with more games. I'm Harry Lasaniziris. This is grecochess. Ladies and gentlemen, goodbye.